The community itself was accustomed to being transported by the police. So up comes this vehicle to their home, and the guys come in with a heart monitor. They come in with a medical gear, and they start taking blood pressures on the people and putting them on the EKG monitor and starting IVs on them. And the community itself was not accustomed to that. So oftentimes, and I'm speaking from experience, the community itself challenged the people that were there. Why are you messing around with my loved one? Why don't you just pick them up and transport them to the emergency room? So we had to teach the community itself. Whenever you call and Freedom House shows up at your residence, this is what you're going to get. You're going to get the very best pre-hospital care. In other words, we will bring the emergency room to you. That was received on a limited basis. So that was one of the challenges. The second challenge we had to deal with was we had to train the emergency rooms themselves, because remember, they were not accustomed to an ambulance pulling up with a patient and the paramedics walking into the emergency room saying, I have this 25-year-old male that suffered a syncopal episode. His blood pressure is whatever, and I started an IV on him. The heart rhythm is a tachybrady rhythm. I've given him a IV of lactated ringers to bring his pressure back up, and it's stable now. They were not accustomed to that being done, number one. Number two is, we can't kid ourselves. They looked at the people that were bringing them in. So you have this organization that was totally Black or African American coming into the emergency room with this sophisticated training. So the hospitals themselves were kind of skeptical. I myself remember, and I'm the first person in this country to do a tracheal intubation outside of the emergency room. I'm also the first person to go into an operating room to do a tracheal intubation on an anesthetized patient. That presented its own set of challenges, because the only time they've seen someone like me in an operating room was with a mop or a bucket. But I didn't have that. I stood there with the chief of the department, and when I walked in there, everything stopped. Everybody started looking at me, and I somewhat found out later why they were looking at me, because I didn't have any custodial gear with me. And I simply walked over to the patient's head, and Dr. Safford told the anesthesiologist, get up. And he said, you sit down and intubate that patient. And at that particular time, I knew all these people were watching me. They had amphitheaters at that time. And then I knew they were there, but I didn't see them. And believe it or not, failure was not an option. Because had I failed that procedure, there's a good chance that paramedics would not be doing it today.
Now, did you know walking in that you were going to be intubating, or was that a surprise?
It was a shock. I had no idea why I was going. I was just requested to meet Dr. Safford outside of the operating room at Presbyterian Hospital. I donned the OR attire, and we walked in, and he just said, intubate the patient. And once I did that, we went from room to room during the course of that day, intubating unsuspecting patients. Little did I know, less than a week later, that I would take that same skill from the operating room, from the hospital, and take it out into the field and intubate a patient in their home. And it was amazing, because at the time that I did it, Dr. Nancy Caroline, we were in the process of writing the paramedic manual, Emergency Care in the Streets. And when she requested I do it, I thought she had lost her mind. And I asked her to repeat it. And she said, I want you to intubate this patient and start an IV on him and transport. And it's ironic, because the patient was breathing. They may have had agonal respiration, but they were still breathing, an elderly gentleman. And I intubated the patient the first time, and we transported him to the emergency room. Now, that's why that second set of challenges began. Remember, the doctors are not accustomed to patients coming in being intubated. So I got challenged by the doctor on call in the emergency room at that time. Who did this intubation? I said, I did. And who are you? I'm John Moon, and I work for Freedom House Ambulance Service. And who told you to do this? I said, our medical director, Dr. Nancy Caroline. So fortunately for me at that particular time, there was a nurse that worked in the emergency room, knew that we were doing that. So she kind of pulled the doctor aside and said, yeah, they're allowed to do that now. And so it's ironic that once we're doing all of these skills and things, little did we know at the time is that we were designing the future of the EMS system that you see today. That wasn't our goal. Our goal was to primarily bring the very best medical care to this neglected, underserved community. And as a result of those efforts, it brings about what we see today. And those are some of the things that I look back on today. And we operated in the Hill District for roughly about 8 years. Ironically, you're looking at this service itself that I would say, despite the fact that we provided a much needed care, we were built on what I would say financial quicksand. We had to rely on grants and donations and things from different foundations to keep ourselves afloat. And we had a agreement with the city of Pittsburgh to provide emergency care to the business district downtown. So that in itself kind of helped us pave the way to what you see today. Now, fast forward, we operated roughly for about 8 years. We were only allowed to operate in our own neighborhood and the downtown business district. So really, no one knew about us until one day there was a kid struck by a Port Authority bus in one of your affluent neighborhoods. And the police arrived there and they didn't know what to do. It was a very traumatic experience for them. So the police dispatcher gets on the radio and says, can you send Freedom House here? And the operator said, I can't send them because it's not their district. And the police officer said, well, you better send someone out here that knows what the hell they're doing. Mm-hmm. Ironically, one of the challenges that we had in our own neighborhood is that police officers or the police dispatchers, there was no 911 system. There were times when we did not get the calls in our own neighborhoods, community that we should have gotten. And once we discovered that, we had to come up with a reason to combat that. So we went out and bought a police scanner and we monitored the police calls. And whenever a call came in to the Hill District community, we self-dispatched. And oftentimes, we would beat the police there, treat the patient, transport them, and pass the police on the way to the emergency room while they're still en route to the person's residence. And that in itself was one of the reasons why we were able to treat this kid that got struck by the bus is we monitored the police calls. And when we heard that, we dispatched ourselves into another community that we were not allowed to go into and subsequently saved this child's life.
Wasn't that what was subsequently led to the loss of funding? Is because everybody else just said, well, why aren't we getting this care?
You're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. Because what happened is once we did that, your residents of your affluent communities said, hey, how dare you allow those individuals over there in that rundown, perhaps welfare community have better medical care than we do? They spoke to the city leaders. I voted for you, Mayor. I contributed to your campaign, Mayor. I own this business, Mayor. I own this $100,000 home, Mayor. You better do something. So the mayor in itself, he had to bow to the wishes of his constituents. And instead of expanding Freedom House into those other communities, he created his own EMS system. And there was no room in it for an entity such as Freedom House. But he just couldn't get rid of Freedom House because that would have created a different set of problems. So he came up with a couple of schemes. He requested that the administration of Freedom House come to meet him in his office. So in their mind, okay, wow, the mayor is coming. He's asking us to come. He's gonna show us how that we can expand this service into another and to all these communities. So they took a plan of operation down to him. Unbeknownst to them, he took the plan and said, put it there on my desk. I will give it to my director. But the reason I called you down here is that I'm getting complaints that your sirens are making too much noise. So when you come into the downtown business district, I'm issuing an executive order that you are not allowed to use your sirens. So if we got a call to the business district for a heart attack or what have you, or someone struck by a vehicle, and we would head to the downtown business district, we would have to go and stop at a red light, wait for it to change, go to the next one, wait for it to change. And that was an effort to impact our response times. The second hurdle we had to overcome with this administration in its effort to disband us is remember I said we had a contract, and that contract roughly paid about $50,000, and that was a lot of money back then. So what he did is every year we would expect a $50,000 check from the city of Pittsburgh to manage payroll and our operations and vehicle maintenance and things of that nature. So January comes, we get a check for $5,000. March, we get another check for $10,000. Maybe April, we got another one for $15,000. So all along the way, he was devising a scheme to get rid of our Freedom House.